Maximize your skills with rudimental drumming at schoolofsuperdrumming.com. The link is in the description. So at pattern number 1 on measure number 1, the accent is going to fall on the first partial. For the second pattern on measure number 2, the accent is going to fall on the second partial, which is going to be on the E, and all of the accents are going to fall on the left hand. For pattern number 3 on measure number 3, the accent is going to fall on the third partial, and all of the accents are going to fall on the right hand. For pattern number 4 on measure number 4, the accent is going to fall on the last partial, which are all going to be left hands. It's going to fall on the So to conclude, you're going to play each pattern 4 times each. Starting in the next phase of this grid, you're going to play each of the patterns 2 times. So for measure number 5, all of the accents fall on the first partial, and then measure 6, the second partial, so on and so forth. And each pattern changes on each measure. And all 4 of the measures are going to be repeated. And then on the last phase of this, which starts on measure number 9, you're going to play each pattern 1 time. So on count number 1, it's going to fall on the first partial, the accent is. And then for count number 2, the accent is going to fall on the E. And then count number 3, the accent falls on the and. And then for count number 4, it falls on the last partial, which is on the And both of these measures are going to be repeated. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. For phase one, there's a total of 3 patterns. Pattern number 1, the accent's gonna fall on the first partial. Pattern number 2 is gonna fall on the second partial. And pattern number 3 is gonna fall on the third partial. For phase number 2, you're gonna play each of the patterns 2 times. And it's gonna have a total of 3 measures, which you are going to repeat. For phase number 3, you'll play each of the patterns 1 time, which they will fall on 1 count. Count number 1 is pattern number 1, count number 2, pattern number 2, count number 3, pattern number 3. As far as the sticking does not change. However, when you get to measure number 2, all of your accents are going to fall on the left hand as opposed to the right hand. But it's a pretty natural transition when doing so.
Sign up today at schoolofsuperdrumming.com. The link is in the description.
With the accent 5 grid, there's going to be a total of 5 different patterns. Pattern 1 has the accent on the first partial. Really, these are just 8th note based single stroke rolls. Just as long as you know how to play the accent on the first partial, you should be good to go. Looking at pattern number 2, you're going to play the accent on the first and second partial. Make sure you play those accents out. The sticking is pretty straightforward. As long as you know how to do the sticking, you should be able to play this. Pattern number 3 has the accent on the first and third partial. If you break them down into each of the measures, the first one has the accents falling on the right hand. The next one has the accents falling on the left hand. As long as you keep that in mind and keep counting and don't lose the count, this is pretty straightforward to do. Pattern number 4 has the accent on the first and fourth partial. As long as you know the accent is going to fall on the first partial and you keep in mind that you're going to play that accent on the fourth partial, you should be good to go. Pattern number 5 has the accents on the first and fifth partial. Looking at the fifth partial, right after you play that accent, you're going to play another accent off of the opposite hand. So don't be afraid to play those accents out. And also, you got to watch out for it transitioning into the next measure. Sometimes you can lose count of what's going on if you don't understand the 5/8 time signature well enough. So watch out for that. Looking at phase 1, you see that all of the patterns have repeats on them. Make sure you don't forget to repeat each of the patterns. For phase 2, you're going to play each of the patterns 2 times and they're going to fit into 2 measures. It's going to be a total of 10 measures and you're going to repeat all of it. But as long as you know how to play each of the patterns individually, this is pretty straightforward. For phase 3, you're going to play each of the patterns 1 time, and they're going to fit into 1 measure each. Looking at the first half of it, the first measure leads off with the right-handed accent, but when you go into the next measure, it leads off with a left-hand accent because of the sticking. So you got to keep in mind of the sticking and what's going on. But as long as you know how to play each of the patterns individually and you keep in mind of the count and where the accents are landing, aka what pattern you should be playing on, you should be able to do this. Looking at the second half of phase 3, it pretty much mirrors the first half of it. The only difference is with the first measure, instead of leading off with the right hand, you're going to lead off with a left-handed accent. And then going into the next measure is going to lead off with a right-handed accent. The sticking is pretty straightforward. The patterns are pretty straightforward. As long as you understand the sticking and the patterns, you should be able to play this whole thing through.
Like this video and subscribe to the channel.
With the Accent 7 grid, we're going to break this down into 3 different phases. For phase 1, looking at the first 2 measures, you're going to have the accent on the first partial only. And these are all single stroke rolls pretty much throughout this whole entire exercise. So you don't have to worry about changing the pattern of your sticking. Just worry about where the accents are landing on each of the partials. And also make sure you repeat these measures. Moving on to the next 2 measures, you're going to have the accent on the first and second partial, and make sure you repeat both of these measures. The next 2 measures, this time move the accent to the first and third partial, and once again repeat both of these measures. The next 2 measures, this time you're going to move the accents to the first and fourth partials, and once again repeat both of these measures. For the next 2 measures, this time you're going to have the accents on the first and fifth partial, and once again repeat both of these measures. The next 2 measures, this time you're going to have the accents on the first and sixth partial. Once again, repeat these measures. Finally, for the last 2 measures, this time you're going to have the accents on the first and seventh partial. Right here can be a little tricky because you got to watch out for the transitions, but otherwise, you're going to repeat both of these measures. For phase number 2, you're going to play each of these patterns 2 times, and they're going to fit into 2 measures. When you look at the first 2 measures, you're going to have the accent on the first partial. It's just going to be laid off with your opposite hands pretty much throughout this whole phase. And then when you look at the next 2 measures, you're going to have the accent on the first and second partial. And pretty much it's the same story throughout all of these measures. You just got to understand that you're going to move the accents to each of these partials for every 2 measures. Like if you look at the rest of these for measure 5 and 6, for example, you're going to have the accent on the first and third partial, and then the next 2, the first and fourth, the first and fifth for the next 2, and all the way down until you get to this repeat. And pretty much as long as you understand that, all you got to do now is just repeat this whole entire phase. For phase number 3, this time you're going to play the pattern 1 time each. And when you look at the first 7 measures, leading off with your right hand from the first measure going all the way down, as you notice the first measure is going to have 1 accent on the first partial, and then when you look at the next measure, you're going to have 2 accents on each of the partials 1 and 2, and then you're just going to move your second accent to each of the partials until you get all the way to 7. And then when you look at the next 7 measures, it's the same exact thing. You're just leading off with your left hand from the first measure all the way down. And as long as you understand that, all you got to do is repeat the whole entire phase.
Like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you want full access to over 500 videos of stick tricks, rudiments, and exercises, sign up today at schoolofsuperdrumming.com. The link is in the description.